All right, welcome to the program. Charles Moscowitz here. We can take calls 508-367-5596. Michael D. Shaw is here. Mike, how are you today?
Well, it's a new year, and on January 20th, it'll look even more positive.
I can hardly wait. Counting, I think everyone's counting down the days. Um, I'm sorry to bring up a grim subject, but obviously, I feel we need to talk about the terrorist attack in New Orleans and the bomb outside of Trump's hotel in Las Vegas.
Right.
And as just with the hope that this isn't going to become the new pattern. This is an issue, by the way, that I can't talk about on TikTok because I did a short TikTok earlier and I was given a strike. I guess, I don't know, they think it's sensitive, whatever reason. Apparently, this is a verboten in the establishment media.
Well,
Um,
evidently, I mean, if you saw the news conference right after the New Orleans event, they brought out that nose ring DEI FBI spokesperson who, I mean, despite the fact that she said initially it was not an act of terrorism, she acknowledged in the same statement that there was improvised explosives on there. And when you drive a truck through a crowd of people on Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve, what the hell is it if it isn't terrorism? So why was it that the first response of the what Debbie Schlussel started calling a number of years ago, FBI, famous but incompetent, the first thing they do is say it's not a terrorist attack. And then Senator John Kennedy, when asked if this could be repeated, says, well, I can't answer. I could, but I can't. So what the hell is going on? And are
well,
the two attacks related?
well, I mean, they seem to be, in that they were both sharing this particular app that I guess has to do with coordinating events. At least that's some evidence. But I think what Kennedy said and what others have said is that there's up to 1,000 Al Qaeda terrorists and cells threaded throughout the United States, and that this sort of thing may become a more normal understanding in the United States. I mean, just like it has become in Germany, when it seems like every year somebody does a terrorist act at a Christmas fair. And now in Germany, they're having, rioting amongst some of the, let's just say the minority neighborhoods in Germany. We know what they are.
Yeah.
And they're calling it a problem with fireworks, as opposed to somehow the firework is showing up and doing this. But it gets to a deeper question that I really feel I want to mention. And it's a topic of a short book that I issued called The Anatomy of a Murderer, a mass murderer, where I look at the guy that committed the murder at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida.
Right.
In my criminology class, we were given a list of criminals that we could write an essay about, and that's the guy I chose. And it was similar to this incident, except in the case of this incident, the guy seemed to have had a military involvement. He was an army background. But the question is, how is it that these people are doing things that are so abnormal and so outside of normal function, and that it has become common enough that you could almost call it an epidemic? And what's going on with them? I mean, this isn't something that was happening before. I know that it happened a little bit during World War II with the Japanese kamikaze attackers who would commit suicide as a way to kill Americans on battleships. And there was one incident of this kind of terror in the 1960s that I know about, and that was the shooter at the tower in the University
University of Texas, yeah.
right? And that was big, big news. I mean, he went up to the top of the tower and he started taking pot shots at people below. And it was like, oh my God, how could this happen? But since I think the 1990s, the late 1990s, between school shooters, starting with the big one at Columbine, and these kinds of terrorist acts, it's become an epidemic. It's become a common problem. And so we have to take a look at it, in a way sociologically, because that's the subject I'm studying now.
Yeah.
What is going on with these people? I mean, we should look at it like you look at any disease. You could look at it like you look at an airplane accident. What happened? Was it, a design flaw? Was it that the plane was too old? Was it stressed, mechanics? Was it human error? And when these plane crashes happen, the FDA does come in and they do a study like that. The Federal Aviation, FAA, and rightfully, and then they file a report and they find some problems, and then they fix it in the future, right? I mean, yeah, a classic example here in Boston was the Coconut Grove fire in 1942. I actually had a relative who died in that fire. And what happened is that when that Coconut Grove went on fire, people couldn't get out because the doors were opening going in. So
Yeah.
they were trapped. So they studied it. And since then, building regulations are such that you have to have doors that go out. And you have to have a certain number of doors. And there's a certain regulation on the number of people that are allowed in. And this is rightful because you learn from the mistakes and so that it doesn't happen again. So we have to have an objective study of what's going on here with these people. And, I don't claim to know the answer, but there are certain threads of reality here. There are certain things that are involved here that were not prevalent before. And the one I would just say right off the bat, and this has to do with, I think, every case of school shooters and young people involved in shooting, is the bad use of psych drugs and the side effects of those drugs. You have young people who are not physically, let alone mentally or emotionally competent enough because they're just not developed to handle those sorts of drugs. And so, it creates psychosis. It creates a sense of unreality. Suddenly they think they're in a video game shooting people.
Yeah.
They become like zoned into almost like a quasi reality. And that there's also elements, if you look at the fine print of those drugs, and I'm not saying I'm completely against them. I mean, there might be some use of them from time to time, particularly with someone who is dealing with schizophrenia. So that's not the issue. The issue is that if you look at the fine print, there it says, like, if you go off of these drugs, you have to do it under supervision because it could lead to homicidal tendencies and suicidal tendencies. It says this in the fine print on the the container of these drugs. You can just read it.
Right, Chuck. But you have to understand one thing about when they give these side effects and contraindications. It also says that your doctor has determined that the benefits of this outweigh the possible side effects, which is the universal antidote to any of that type of information. But there's multiple causes here.
Right.
All right. What was different in the early 1960s when that school shooting occurred, University of Texas, Austin? And it comes down to a couple of things. One is we didn't then have these virtually suicidal levels of tolerance that have been forced upon everybody. Okay. If there was some lunatic out there, and believe me, when they retell these stories, it's always, no one had any idea that, no, everybody had a big idea. But back then, these things didn't get out of hand. But the mere fact that the most important thing for the FBI to say after the New Orleans incident was, although they changed this is not a terrorist attack.
Oh, I know. Well, that's
It's the same nonsense that propelled the entire response to COVID, the fake vaccines, and so on. Okay. And one of the reasons Trump won the election was that people decided they weren't going to listen to the elite media or the government anymore. And I was
absolutely.
saying, by the way, in articles I wrote in 2020 when this thing first started, and I was getting very few responses. Why would anyone believe a word the CDC says anymore when they keep
Oh, I
changing their
know.
narrative every 5 minutes? But you have to appreciate that there are psychotic levels of people worshiping authority in an atheist society. All right. They have to
Mhm.
believe the government because what else is there? Remember, the government told you to become an atheist, in effect, with the school prayer decisions. And from that came this pornographic obsession of which these terrorist attacks are basically part of. Okay. These guys are all disaffected. They're living in some sort of bizarre fantasy world. What is the go ahead and be a Muslim, but what is the point of blowing stuff up? There's no,
Well,
it's
yeah.
so
I mean,
obvious.
I think, Mike, your points are all well taken. I mean, about the atheist society, the pulling the rug out from under the moral and ethical foundation of Western society, which is something they've deliberately done.
Of
The
course.
law and the lies that have come out, particularly from this illegitimate regime that is winding down right now, and going back to COVID. And I blame Trump for listening to Fauci and Birx. He should not have done that. But putting that aside, everything about that was a lie.
Yeah.
Everything about, it's we've gotten used to this. I mean, the most recent example, now we all know this. You and I have been talking about this since day one, is Biden's dementia. The media just lied about this for 4 years. And I think people now get used to this. The FBI is a classic example. Thank God we're going to get Kash Patel, God willing, to go
Right.
in and clean this thing up because he's a clear truth teller. But this still doesn't get to the deeper question. What is going on with these individuals that they would become so extreme that they would go out and just kill as many people as they can like that? And, in these cases, I think particularly in the case of this New Orleans guy, I don't know if you've seen the video of him when he was basically a property manager
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Houston. He seemed like a normal person to me, right? A lot of these people, it's like something happened. Something happened to their brains. And maybe people might say, well, this is what I think got me in trouble on TikTok. I'm putting the tin hat on. Okay, fine. I think that this is a situation similar to the medieval cult of the assassins. I think I've talked about this before,
Yeah.
and it's worth mentioning again. The cult of the assassins, and this is history. I'm not making this up. It was in Persia during Islamic rule. What they would do is they would find some disaffected guy, like a lot of the personalities that are involved in these things, somebody who was kind of going nowhere, and they would pick him up and swoop him up to this beautiful palace in the mountains where he'd have every kind of earthly desire fulfilled, everything you could want. The word hashish comes from assassins. You'd have drugs, you'd have all kinds of substances, you name it, complete luxury. This would go on for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And then you'd reach the end of the time and they'd say, we're going to send you back down to regular society, but if you want to have this for eternity, you have to fulfill a mission, and that mission was usually to kill somebody that they wanted to take out, an assassination. You need to get yourself into this circle and get close and perform this murder. And if you do, then the soul of this person that you just murdered is going to enter your body, and you're going to become like Superman. You'll have a super eternal life. And that the process of this involved a, I don't know, say primitive, but a medieval form of brainwashing. You would literally put a person under a hypnotic state between the combination of the drugs and the earthly pleasures, and then they're going back, and all these things going on, this sort of controlled environment. You would have a person who was, to use a modern term, an automaton. They would
Yeah.
be programmed to perform this act. Now, since World War II, and I think that the Nazis were masters at this. I mean, in terms of learning how to program masses of people to a very high degree. I mean, every ruler, in a sense, every high commissioner, every going all the way back to ancient times, there's an element of that in society. A certain, we accept certain principles that may be not true, just because there's a mass, understanding of what's true, as opposed to what may actually be true. But the Nazis brought this kind of manipulation to a high art. If you look at their rallies at Nuremberg, for example, filmed by Leni Riefenstahl very brilliantly, these were situations where the participants, all of the sensory elements would be channeled. They'd have certain smells. They'd use these massive bonfires. There were certain visuals. They were always done at night. They had loudspeakers, so you heard the sound would take over. Everything would become like this collective experience. There's a sociological term for this, collective effervescence or something like that, where you would be I mean, I suppose you could even say that churches do this, synagogues do it, right? Where you have like a group, you're chanting a group prayer, except in a sense, it's not to try to create something evil. I mean, it's not like a brainwashing. But this is on a mass scale where you have thousands of people experiencing this. And then, Hitler was a brilliant practitioner of this, and he's been imitated ever since by world leaders. They all admit this. I mean, maybe not publicly, but he would come out on the stage in a very meek, speaking almost like in a whisper, and he would appear very kind of quiet and sad. And then he would start to build, and he'd build, and he'd build by the end of the speech, he'd be screaming and arms flailing, and everybody in the audience, the women would be passing out. And, there were reports of women having orgasms. I mean, everybody would be like in a state of frenzy by the end of the experience. Very planned and very coordinated. Well, I think that after World War II, you had the American intelligence apparatus, do MK Ultra. You had the British with their Tavistock Institute. Canada was involved in it. Russia certainly was involved in it with their Polytech Institute. And you had them study further psychological means by which people could be brainwashed, both on a mass level and on an individual level. And I think that they've taken it to a fine, high art in terms of finding these, disaffected guys, like the assassins did, and brainwashing them to do these missions, because this isn't normal. Nobody in their right mind would go out and do this. I don't care
No,
how
it isn't
evil they are.
normal, but maybe what's unspoken here, but I will speak it, is that there's a self-preservation aspect in law enforcement. I mean, what would happen if crime disappeared? That's a big, big industry with
Right.
defense attorneys, judicial system, and by the same token, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in healthcare. One wonders how you can spend $1 trillion on cancer research and not
Right.
cure cancer, right?
Sure.
So I would not be surprised at all if this is directed by, let's say, the FBI. I mean, why not? Okay, fine. Kill a few people, but keep the population in a state of alert so we can turn to Massa and he's going to take care of us. I mean,
Right.
why aren't people asking the obvious question?
I think that you're basically continuing my train of thought here.
Yeah.
That I don't know if it's the FBI in particular, but there, this is this might be the last gasp of the deep state. I don't know, but the point is that they have these skills to commit these acts of terror, to scare the hell out of everyone, to create social disorder. What could be more ripping apart of the social fabric than sending out a car to kill innocent people on a sidewalk like that on a mass scale? So they program them to do this, and it creates such havoc, and rightfully, that they are then able to perpetrate and further advance their power.
Well, in further support of this, as we've said on this show many times, how come there is never a definitive explanation of any of these mass shootings, especially who financed it? It's always some disaffected guy, living in his parents' basement or in a trailer park.
Right.
How do you come up with thousands of dollars to buy guns and ammo, work out the logistics, unless he has some help? All right. Why, in the name of God, do people do gain of function research on viruses unless you want to weaponize viruses?
That's right. And they're doing it apparently right here in Boston right now. They're still doing gain of function. Yeah, these are all tools of this international establishment. I hate to put it that way. And I don't think it's an issue of Islam either. I mean, I think Islam is being used as a scapegoat in this regard. I don't. Why would they? What do they get out of this? I mean, sending somebody into into New Orleans, going into a crowd. I mean, I think that it's something much bigger than that. It's not an issue of Islamic terrorism at all. It's because I mean
it's a small, scary event. Okay, think about it, Chuck. If you coordinated 500 of these events to occur in 1 month, people would get wise. Okay,
right.
But if you do a little one here and a little
well,
one
that's
there,
right. They keep everybody off balance. You never know what's going to happen next. We don't know when the next one's going to be. Everybody the next day wakes up in whether you want to admit it or not. I mean, I don't think I have a problem. You're scared. You're thinking, gee, where are my kids? Where's my daughter right now? Where's so and so? Where should I go to that concert? Should I go to that movie? Do I want to be out in public? In these events, it creates. Look, this is what happened in Israel to a certain extent. I mean, after they had a situation with a Purim celebration in Tel Aviv, some terrorists showed up. They started to massacre little children and girls, dressed in costumes. And since then, the Israelis no longer have Purim outside. It's just they just don't do it. I mean, they do it inside. It creates it changes the society. I mean, I know we could say, well, we can't let it change society, and that's true. But terrorism does do that. I mean, I'll give the historic example, and the Israelis have learned from this one, and that is the Crusades. When the Crusades created the Kingdom of Jerusalem under Godfrey II, the Frankish king, he brought his family after there was, first of all, it was all men, then they sent for their families. And the wives and the children decided to go down to the banks of the Jordan River to celebrate and have a picnic. And when they got there, they were all massacred by Saracens, is who they called it in that time. It's Arab today, putting that aside. And one or two of them were allowed to get away, who went back to Jerusalem, and they reported what had happened. Now, the answer on the part of King Godfrey was to shut the gates of Jerusalem and to build castles and to close everything in. We're not going to go outside. It's too dangerous. Eventually, they sent their families back home to France. and it became like a garrison mentality. And that is what led to the defeat of the Crusades, because they were changed by the fear of the terrorism around them. They didn't stand up to it. Not that they necessarily ultimately could have, putting that aside, but they went inward. They withdrew. They became like, they didn't they responded to the terrorism the very way that the terrorists wanted them to respond. So yeah, you don't want to withdraw in the face of this sort of problem, and the Israelis have not. I mean, they have a little bit, but for the most part, you go into Israel, you mess with Israel, they'll kick you back.
Yeah.
They'll fight, they'll find you, and they'll get everyone involved in it. They won't kill innocent people to the best of their ability, in spite of the propaganda that the other side might push. But they will try to find the people involved in that incident and take them out, because that's the message they want to send. If you want to do this, we don't care if it takes 10 years, 20 years, we're going to find you. That's what Golda Meir said after the Munich attack at the Olympics. There were 20 terrorists involved. And she said, look, we're going to find every one of them and take them out. And it took, I think, 20 years to get them all. But they did, and that's the response. There wasn't this kind of...
By the way, there were plenty of people in Israel that were against this prolonged search for these guys.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because, this flower child mentality, which apparently is more important than life itself, that maybe they were misguided, or we can't lower ourselves to that level, or whatever cliche they're going to come up with.
Well, that's why Hamas was able to do this terrorism on October 7th, because the army had become kind of taken over by the same type that has taken over the U.S. Army and the U.S. establishment. This couldn't happen, and we can be nice to people. And Golda Meir also said something, and I'm paraphrasing. She said, look, if we have a choice between having good public relations or being alive, I'd rather pick life.
Yeah.
It's like we have, and you have a right to defend your life and that of your family and your property. If a sovereign nation can't do that, it's not worth being sovereign. I mean, that's the basic function of creating a sovereign.
That's exactly right. I mean, the people in Gaza and their supporters played the PR perfectly, right? And it's not so much anti-Semitism, it's that there's so many people with the woke mind virus that it's easy enough for them to become sympathetic to, oh my gosh, you're killing civilians and whatnot.
Right.
And
they're building their headquarters in the basement of a hospital for that very reason. They want to see the civilians killed, so they could then, you can have CBS, Lester Holt sent a reporter down there to film babies being killed, and they would get that kind of public relations out of it. Meanwhile, they're firing missiles from that basement, and they're terrorizing the hospital.
Well, I mean, to be honest, though, that's nothing new with Hamas. I mean, you can go back to Pearl Harbor. I don't think any serious historian believes that we didn't know in advance of the attack.
Right. That's been established. I think that Thomas Dewey actually talked about that when he ran against FDR, and he was told to tone it down, which apparently he did. He shouldn't have. But
that's it. So it certainly, in FDR's sick mentality, it was worth killing 2,900 personnel at Pearl Harbor to get us into this war that he wanted to get into so badly.
Exactly. And he was celebrating it right after he gave that famous speech. There's images of him just having a yuck over the whole thing. That, yes, we finally did it. We're at war. This is the warmongers mentality. But to go back to these terrorists, this is a new phenomena where you have people who are committing senseless mass murders against just, it's not even political. I mean, are the people in New Orleans celebrating New Year's, is that a political target? I mean, I get, as evil as it is, I get the fact that Hamas wants to kill the Jews, right? And so they go to a rock concert to kill as many Jews as they can. Completely evil, but it is targeted. Whereas this is just like, we're going to kill, people in New Orleans. I mean, really? What the hell? Or like you get, somebody shooting up a high school. It's something about this that, it's just not normal. There is
No, it's not
something.
normal, but it's becoming more common. And I don't use the term pornographic lightly. All right. Ultimately, well, all right, there's a video going around now where some woman analyzes the demographics of OnlyFans. She claims, and I find this extremely hard to believe, that there's 165 million men in the US, over 80 million are subscribers to OnlyFans. All right. I don't think that's true, but go with that. All right. And then there's some ridiculous number of women who are OnlyFans models, a few million. All right.
Isn't that the thing where just like anybody can open up an account and take nude pictures of themselves and sell it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So this is maybe relatively harmless, but one of the other factors that came out of this analysis is that the vast majority of these OnlyFans customers are married men. Okay. So,
Well, that's probably the vast majority of porno customers anyway,
yeah.
right?
So, yeah, if you think about that, what the hell is going on? Okay. You'd rather look at somebody else doing it in a picture than your own partner. All right.
Right.
So you ask the question, what's the point of killing X number of people in the French Quarter in New Orleans? It's pornographic mentality. There's no point in it, but it's some sort of sick release mechanism. You're not going to win anything for ISIS.
I don't see it as a political thing, unless to go back to my original premise. These people are somehow Manchurian candidates for somebody who has an agenda. They think
absolutely, and it's law enforcement that has the agenda. I mean, the easiest way to analyze this is the so-called war on drugs.
Right.
Okay. The war on drugs proved that you could spend $1 trillion to incarcerate over 1 million people to make sure that drugs are more readily available and of higher quality. But it's a tool of enforcement. So you can take some poor black kid in the ghetto that has a dime bag and put him in jail, enriching this so-called prison industrial complex. This doesn't happen by itself.
No, it's a big business. It's slave labor. It's profitable, right? I mean, isn't that something, especially with the privatization of prisons?
Yeah.
Right. Isn't that like, didn't Kamala Harris, when she was Attorney General in California, she was like, big Democrat donors, or these private prisons were big donors to the Democratic Party. So she was keeping people in prison, mostly black men, for minor crimes, longer than they needed to be there so that they could do slave labor.
Well, that's exactly right. But people never want to come to this conclusion. All right.
Right.
These questions aren't completely answered. And like Senator Kennedy of Louisiana, well, I could say, but I'm not going to say. Well, why the hell not?
Probably because it might be because it's classified, which is interesting. He knows something because he looks at briefings, but he's not going to say it publicly, which is his way of telling us that there's something going on here.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was clever that way.
Yeah, I mean that's a smoke signal, and right. But the thing is that I think that there is something going on here. These are instances that are planned. They're not accidental. They are coordinated. They are, I mean, in this case, the New Orleans target was a soft target. They knew that there was going to be an easy ride in there.
Well, but how did they know that the bollards were under maintenance?
Well, that's just it. That's why I'm saying this is well planned. People did know, and that look, I'm not pointing fingers. I have no idea who this is. I mean, this is like what Michael Glennon wrote about the double government, right? It's very powerful. It is unaccountable. It is faceless. It is, it's secretive, and it does stuff. In Europe, I heard Charlie Robinson. I don't know if you ever listened to his podcast. He actually started as a guest of mine before he did the podcast. It's great. It's called Macroaggressions. Good guy. He's done some pretty deep dive work on this Operation Gladio in Europe. That he says what it was irregular military personnel that were operating behind the lines during World War II, who are still there and who make up the backbone of NATO, and that who are involved in various kind of criminal activities and violent nation building activities around the world. They're, he points out that they're deeply involved in the drug trade, and that he seems to think that they have a hand in these school shootings and in other things. Now, I don't know that, but the point that, it gets into a little bit of a closer approximation of who is behind this. Again, we don't know because it is secret, but there is something going on here. Say I have a tin hat on, I don't know, whatever.
No, it's not a tin hat. What you're doing is using inductive reasoning and coming up with this dangerous conclusion that they don't want you to come up with. I wrote a whole piece on this a couple of years ago, why they always favor deductive logic, which really is not that useful unless you're Sherlock Holmes and you want to come to a very small conclusion that because of this soiled handkerchief, it therefore must be this guy. Okay, great. But you don't want to come to a big conclusion that there's no other way to explain this crap other than there's some malevolent force behind it. All right. And again, people don't want to accept that. I mean, when this, you mentioned Thomas Dewey, but the real sort of revisionist look at Pearl Harbor started kind of in the 80s, where these articles came out, and there were people my age who they would say, I don't want to accept it, I don't want to hear about it, because it was drummed into their head, the evil empire attacked us unprovoked, which of course it was provoked, and that just became an article of faith. All right.
Well, something, any of these things are stage managed by a sort of a mainstream establishment. I mean, look, I'm not to go to details, but I got in trouble when I ran for Congress because I had written a few articles questioning the Oklahoma City bombing. And I quoted in those articles reporters who were there at the time who were, part of CBS. I mean, major stream reporters. But I mean, Barney Frank took me to the coals for that. And even more recently, there are questions about what happened on the September the 11th of 2001 that have never been answered. And what I'd say to that is that it seems like every time something like this happens, we are given like an official series of points that we are to accept, and that if you don't believe it, you're subhuman. You're like an Untermensch. You're like evil, And I mean, the 2020 election is a perfect example of that. Not to mention the January 6th protests.
Yeah.
It's all gaslighting, but you're given a couple of principles. This is what happened. These are the talking points. It's delivered by Lester Holt and the rest of them. And if you don't go along, you're crazy. I mean, there's something wrong with you, and you could, or worse, you can end up being committed somewhere. So, I don't believe any of these official narratives anymore. I don't trust any of it. And yeah, I know this sounds like a weird thing, but the one incident that really made me no longer trust the mainstream media and realize that it's all lies was the death of Trayvon Martin. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah. Okay.
There was something about that we then find out that the tape was doctored by CBS News and that it was not at all the way it was originally portrayed. Now, I'm not saying that the man did, unfortunately, he died as a result of a scuffle, but, it was not, the guy that killed him was not a white supremacist. He's actually black. And,
He was
the
Hispanic,
whole,
I believe. They call him a white Hispanic.
but he was a black Hispanic.
Yeah.
But the point is that the whole thing was nothing but a concoction. And it was done at the time, I think, because subliminally, it was a way to help Obama get reelected. Somehow we would think, oh, this is Republicans who want to have guns and who are violent and who are racists and who are doing, and it's kind of the use of this mass, agenda.
Right. But you can mention that, and I agree with you. And you can mention COVID, and I agree with you. But what about the fact that the common man believes all this crap?
Because they don't have time to go deeper like you and I do. Most people are too busy, working so they can pay 40% of their income in taxes, and they still get their news from
Lester Holt.
the big three, Lester Holt and them and David Muir. That's where they get their news. And if you watch those shows, I mean, they just repeat the same friggin' story, and it's often something that's so trivial, and it's lies. I mean, most recently, they're fear-mongering and lying about the upcoming Trump administration policy on deportation. They did a whole story the other night, Lester Holt, since we're on the topic, about...
Why don't you get him on your show?
I mean, they interviewed these people saying, we might be deported. Well, it turns out that they were not going to be deported because they were legal refugees from Afghanistan who were rescued because they'd been pro-American at the time that Biden had that catastrophe and that government collapsed. So there's no problem with them being deported. They're here legally. That's not what it's about. But somehow they did this story all around this family fearing that they're going to be deported. They're not going to be deported. It's a lie. They don't address the real question here, which is, what about illegal aliens who can be deported? That's not, you know what I mean? In other words, it's this enormous kind of like three-card Monte, this sort of, they're not going to talk about the actual issue.
Right, but what is the audience? I mean, maybe the common man doesn't have time to think about it. But let's face it, the common man went through COVID, saw how he was lied to, saw how businesses failed on purpose. It's the old story. Well, they were doing their best, but I prefer the Robert Welch approach, okay, where he said, look, if Eisenhower were completely in favor of the communists, what would he have done different? And leave it at that, all right?
Mm-hmm.
If the government specifically wanted to shut down the economy and force the election of Biden, what would they have done differently?
Right. That was the actual sum effect of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it had everything to do with it. And I think everybody knows that now, but I know what you mean. I mean, could they pull that off again? I mean, they couldn't pull off another election steal. So I don't know. What do you think? I mean, as President Trump is about to be sworn into office, you kind of know. I mean, you feel it. I certainly sense that they're not going to take it lying down. I mean, they're going to do everything they can to obstruct and to make sure that Trump doesn't have the functionality as president.
Yeah, but I'm
And,
afraid it's going to backfire
yeah,
the same way that some of these entertainment idiots keep going on. And Julia Roberts recently got fired from a number of upcoming projects because she just wouldn't back down with her stupid politics and that insane ad. If you remember, go ahead and lie to your husband about how you voted. It's up to you. What happens at the ballot box stays in the ballot box. All this kind of stuff,
right.
and that turned off a lot of people. So, they're
That's almost as bad as the one with Sarah Silverman doing those commercials about how to steal votes. They don't like to talk about that now, but you're making a joke. Ha ha! You're a college student. You could vote at college and you could vote at home. You could vote for your grandma. You could vote for your grandpa. It was a big joke. Of course, after the 2020 election, that's been deep-sixed. But yeah, I mean, they're not going to get away with such open, kind of like stuff like that. I mean,
it doesn't surprise me at all that the elite media just keeps doubling down. They don't know anything other than that. Okay. The analogy I use, I had a good friend who was a vice president of Capitol Records back during the glory years of the music industry. All right.
Mm-hmm.
He saw the writing on the wall, when the MP3s came along and the file sharing and so he got out of the record business. All right. Meanwhile, other people stayed in, doubled down, trying to prosecute that infamous case that RIAA had against some poor kid in the ghetto that was sharing music files with his friends. And they somehow didn't realize the bad PR of something that idiotic. So, no, that's all they know. They don't realize.
But the question is, how are they going to do it? I mean, are they going to be successful in terms of thwarting President Trump's agenda?
No.
I mean, I think that they're going to try to obstruct his placing of his cabinet. And I just want to say on that just from a political standpoint, I hope that people see how bad that is, given the fact that, is every single Democrat in the House of Representatives going to vote against every single Trump appointee?
Yeah.
I mean, that didn't happen even when Biden was in office. Republicans voted for his cabinet ministers. Republicans voted for Obama's ministers because you want to have the new president have his cabinet. I mean, it's not really.
Well, not if you're a Democrat. The only thing you stand for is abortion and destruction.
Yeah, but have they gotten that bad now that they're just going to vote?
Have they gotten that bad?
I mean, I don't think they did that to George W. Bush. Democrats voted for his nominees. They voted for
George W. Bush was a few years ago. All right. And what happened is they just doubled and tripled down on the same thing, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't work. It's the old story.
But are they going to get away with that? I mean, are they going to? Is that going to lead to what it should lead to, which is in 2 years they're going to get big losses? Are people going to? I mean, are their constituents going to put up with it?
No.
Is it got to be? I mean, they're going to vote against every. I mean, first of all, Trump can now implement his cabinet without them, anyways.
Yeah.
He can.
The Democratic Party
appointees. I just saw an article about this in the Gateway Pundit. There's not just recess appointments, but there's also this. There's this other act that was passed. I think it was a way to stop Trump in the first term. But the point is, it actually works in his favor in that he can appoint his entire cabinet without. If the House wants to monkey around with his cabinet, he can just appoint them all. Maybe not indefinitely, but he can get every one of them in there. and because he wants to get started on day one, they can't be messing around and dragging this through. They're going to turn it into another, especially with certain nominees, like, not to mention names, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They're going to try to do another Kavanaugh, pull that kind of crap, go into somebody's personal life and take out a magnifying glass and look at every little thing they ever did. I mean, is that what they're going to do?
Well, look at the difference. When Clarence Thomas was up,
Yeah.
they brought in Anita Hill, and that got plenty of traction, although Thomas still got obviously confirmed. But back then, people weren't as cynical as they are now.
Right.
People actually gave the time of day to this stupid woman. It was on TV for days and so on and so forth. And no one seemed to come, in media anyway, to the obvious conclusion that if you believe every damn word Anita Hill said, the worst thing was that Clarence Thomas told her a dirty joke.
Exactly. Nobody ever said that he touched her or that he, and in fact, there's evidence that they were friends right up to the time he left that department, and then he advanced her. That was phony. I mean, she was offered money. I think that in that case, she was offered money. She was offered fame. She was offered, position she ended up getting a tenured professor spot at Brandeis, heading up the diversity department. Interestingly, she was not anybody. She was like a nobody. Talk about plucking somebody out of obscurity. She was a mid-level office person who suddenly, but this is, yeah.
I mean, Liz Warren was an obscure professor at Rutgers, and suddenly is fast-tracked to Harvard University.
Right. Well, because she checked off a box saying Native American.
Right.
But
to answer your question, people are not quite as gullible as they were back then.
But are they as partisan? I mean, is the Trump derangement and the hatred for Trump that high?
Look, there's always going to be, as you and I have talked about, 25 to 30% of these left-wing fanatics that hate their life, always will. So they have to, again, not to beat the drum here, another form of sort of political pornography.
Yeah, but if that's all it is, then they're not going anywhere. The point is, can they do this? Do they have enough of a clout left? Okay.
No, and the Democratic Party is a dying brand. All right.
Right.
They lost all the swing states. So you can slice it and dice it any way you want. But the most
all the bellwether districts. They lost both the popular and the electoral college. They lost the Senate convincingly, even though they tried to steal, I think, one or two, including Kerry Lake. But they still lost it. And they might have a little bit of a finger on the House. I don't know. Do you think that? I mean, Johnson is really a weak, spineless figure, but I mean, do they? I don't know if the Republic, because of their stolen seats, I'm not sure it's the time to have like a.
I don't know that Johnson has the votes to be speaker again, even with Trump endorsement. Trump was trying to make peace. I mean, you got to understand that he can't be, pounding the table and being bellicose about every damn thing.
No, but I heard one very troubling scenario, which is that if Johnson he doesn't get the speakership, Trump may not get certified in the electoral college on January 8th, because January 6th, because the speaker has to, make that happen. I think there's it's actually a pretty perilous situation, and the Republicans only have two more representatives as their majority. So
yeah, it's a very, very slim majority.
I mean,
but again,
putting aside the fact that several seats were stolen, I mean, that's the way it goes in California, where they're still counting.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's going to persist. The biggest thing that I noticed was Starr County, Texas, the most Hispanic county in the U.S., had never voted Republican since 1892, went 75% Republican. So the times they are a changing. It's
Yeah.
a dying brand, okay? And how many years did it take from 1865 to 2025, let's say? This Civil War segregationist mentality it's going down the drain.
Yeah, but do they have the chutzpah to pull off one final coup
They
d'etat?
could try. They
You
could
know,
try, but it's going to backfire. I mean, the most pathetic column came out today by your friend, what's his name, the political pundit, so-called, from Louisiana. Why can't I think of his name? You know who I mean.
I
The
do.
Southern guy who predicted Harris was going to win easily. Carville.
Oh,
All
yeah.
right. So it's about what does the Democratic Party have to do to get back? And it's like, why do you care? You know, when is it time to jump off the bandwagon here? You know, it ain't worth saving.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope you're right. I mean, I don't think it is, but they seem to, they're just waiting. They're just waiting and sitting, waiting for Trump to do something. I don't know. It's I don't know what
do
they're
they
going to
stand for, Chuck? Besides abortion,
obviously nothing. Abortion and welfare, as you say.
And I don't think that's real popular as much as they think it is. But that's it. That's the entire platform. And they acted surprised when they lost. I don't think anyone was really surprised.
Well, the only question in my mind at the time was how much are they going to try to steal it? And Trump. That you had that. I remember that Iowa poll that said that Harris was surging. That was fraud. I mean, that's election interference. She should be prosecuted. I think Trump is filing a case there. I'm glad Trump is finally standing up to this crap. He's going to file law cases against.
Well, okay, let me ask you this. What was in it for her to destroy a decades-long reputation for this asinine poll?
I think that she finally decided to fall on her sword as one final Hail Mary pass to try to derail the election. This is all they had left. It was just a few days left. Maybe they actually thought it would work, right? Because the minute they announced this in the Des Moines Register, it became international news. Oh, my God. Harris is surging. I mean, it was just like a last-minute, desperate sort of, pass. I mean, it was like they just threw everything at it, and she just took a gamble, and it didn't fly, obviously. But
no, but understand, her
that was not right fraud.
Career is based on doing accurate polls. What would possess her to come out with an obviously fake poll? Her credibility is gone. She's out of the business.
Maybe something. We might keep an eye on her bank accounts and see if something. It's like these phony fat, prosecutors who have gone after Trump with the lawfare cases. They've all gotten rich from that. Fani, fat, big Fani, and Bragg in New York, and the rest of them. They get big fat paychecks. I mean, that corrupt judge, Meacham or whatever his name is, his daughter got 85 mil. Yeah, 85 mil in money from leftist groups selling the idea that we're going to put Trump in jail. They've all gotten rich from it. That's what it partially is about. They're willing to put and they know they think that this leftist infrastructure is very powerful, and it is, and it'll reward them, and they'll be taken care of, and they have been. So maybe she's in that category. You have to watch Lois Lerner, right? Remember from during the Obama years? She was taken care of, pled the fifth 42 times before Congress, screwing conservative organizations who wanted to do the same thing liberal organizations have done in terms of tax exemption. Met with Obama many times. I mean, the whole thing was a screw job, but she was taken care of. After the fact. I mean, I'd like to see what she's doing now. It's like Anita Hill.
Well, how does she live with herself? And if the answer is she has no conscience, that's fine.
But they've convinced themselves that they're doing good. They've stopped Trump, or they've stopped the evil conservatives. They're true believers, right? I mean, how does the communist movement and people involved in any of these movements?
Yeah, but I would respect her more if she went into a Berlin bunker and blew her brains out, died for the cause. But to walk around for the rest of her life knowing that
they genuinely believe that all the people involved in the election steal, they believe that they were doing the right thing. They do. They believe for the country. This is all, we're standing up against the evil, orange man. I mean, I really think that. I mean, I've seen this. I've seen people like this.
But if you ask any of these people, why is he evil? They can't answer.
Of course not. No, they can't. They fall into an inarticulate ball of blubber. I mean, they can't. It's like trying to nail Jello to a wall. Anyways, Mike, what do you have coming up on your
Well, I have my latest piece went out a few days ago. Unto us a child is born.
Indeed.
Which I got actually some good commentary on, including the guy I've known for years gave me a call. I mean, I'm not making this up. Gave me a call the other day, and he said, "I really want to thank you. That made my day." And I was like, "What the hell is he talking about?" And he mentioned that call. So it and the way it is, and you as a creator know that ultimately you have no idea how this stuff is going to fly with the public.
Right.
There's stuff you probably thought was great that no one thought was good, and vice versa.
Sure.
So, we try to tie a few things together.
Oh, that's excellent. That's very gratifying.
And it's one of the shorter ones actually.
Yeah.
But we talk about your friend Isaiah from the Old Testament.
Yes.
And mention that, and not every one of my pieces gets into religious stuff, but some of them do. So, I mean, if you're not going to do that for Christmas, what the hell are you going to do it, right?
Exactly. That's the time for it. Right?
And by the way, you're still Hanukkah is still going on, I believe, or
I think we had our last lighting of candles last night, so it's off to the new year.
Off to the new year, and
And I feel generally very excited. I just I felt the need to bring up these.
There's always going to be something,
Exactly.
No eagle without a serpent, as they say.
And it's also, as much as we want to celebrate this great victory, which it is, you can't put down the armor too quickly. No. It's an ongoing struggle. This is the beginning of a continuation of efforts, education efforts, just bringing people up to awareness.
But you're asking exactly the right question. How are these events occurring? Who's behind it?
Exactly. It's not an accident. These things are not coincidences.
No.
And I think it's simplistic to say, oh, it's Islamic terrorism. No, it's something bigger than that. This is something else going on here, I really think. Anyway, Mike, so I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Sounds good. Take care.